percent of folks with either diabetes or pre-diabetes. Metabolic syndrome is a huge deal. 60% of individuals, roughly by the time you're 60 years old, have some form of disease or metabolic syndrome. And so recognizing this issue and talking to docs over the past 10 or 15 years about this, I thought, well, let's develop a formula based on science to help individuals deal with, give doctors some ammunition for their patients. Again, the nutrients backed by years of replicated science. This includes carotenoids, omega-3s, and nutrients that aid in glucose metabolism and lipid metabolism. And so this product, we just released it fairly recently. It's called MacuHealth DM.
Hello and welcome to the Chris Wolfe Podcast on iCode Media. Today, again, we're going to have Dr. Jim Stringham on with us to discuss, metabolic diseases and how they're related, how the problem is global, but how it's related to the eyes, and what can we do about those metabolic diseases in our practices for our patients. And I'm excited for this conversation. It's one that I've been looking forward to having for a long time, mainly because I see these patients all the time. You think about patients who have diabetes in our practices, patients who are overweight, obese. They're not insignificant. I even think about our patients with ocular surface disease and inflammation, how much of that is driven by things like gut health and metabolic diseases. So I think it's a timely conversation to round out the year and to sort of project forward how we're going to interact with patients in 2025. So Dr. Stringham, as always, thanks for coming on. The most common questions I get include, what ophthalmological codes or evaluation and management codes should I use? What ICD-10 codes do I need to bill with this CPT code? What CPT codes can be billed together and what can't? And my favorite, how do I manage a patient who has diabetes who comes in for a quote-unquote routine eye exam? These questions really highlight the confusion and uncertainty that serves as a daunting hurdle for providers, makes it more challenging for them to care for their patients and provide those patients with the best opportunity for a lifetime of ocular health and clear vision. That's why we built iCode Education for this specific purpose. Our mission is to provide optometrists with resources to help you understand disease states, revenue cycles, and billing and coding so that you can put that on autopilot and truly care for your patients. Check out iCodeEducation.com. That's EYECODE education.com. We've developed a premier billing and coding bundle that includes all of our billing and coding resources in one place. We also have a 10% discount code just for listeners of this podcast. Enter the coupon code EYECODEMEDIA22 at checkout. We'd love to work with you. Check out iCodeEducation.com. Hello, dedicated optometrists. Are you looking for a way to support your patient's vision and overall eye health? Let me introduce you to Vision Edge Pro, a visual performance supplement that stands out in our profession. Vision Edge Pro contains a balanced blend of mesozeaxanthine, lutein, and zeaxanthine in a 10-10-2 ratio. This combination has been scientifically shown to increase macular pigment density, which enhances visual performance, including contrast sensitivity and vision in glare situations. Additionally, Vision Edge Pro provides 300 milligrams of DHA and EPA, fulfilling the daily requirements for omega-3s as recognized by the leading health organizations. This ensures your patients receive the essential nutrients their eyes need for optimal health. Whether it's for everyday screen use, night driving, or enjoying the outdoors, Vision Edge Pro supports your patients in seeing their best. Recommend Vision Edge Pro for your patients today and help them achieve clearer, healthier vision. Contact your local MacuHealth representative for more details. Vision Edge Pro, because your patients deserve the best in eye health. Go to MacuHealth.com and use the coupon code PODCAST2024 at checkout for special discounts.
Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate it. This is going to be great.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So let me get right into it. Tell me a little bit about the kind of back, you've done a ton of research into, metabolic diseases and how it stands today, but give us a backstory of when you think about the history of metabolic diseases and the why behind it. How far back do we go and where did things start to change?
Well, I mean, this is a great question, and you want to look back, sort of as an epidemiologist to kind of scan what's going on and what's predictive of where we are today. We have data back to 1985 from the CDC on obesity in America, and we have data from the different states. You can access the data actually online. It's really fascinating. There are PowerPoint slides that show you progression through time every year. That first year in 1985, we only had data on about half of the states in the United States. And the reason for that is that, obesity wasn't really a big problem back then, if you can imagine. So the nationwide prevalence of obesity, and how we define obesity is a BMI, a body mass index of 30 or higher. And that, for just comparison's sake, is a person who's 5'4" and roughly 30 pounds overweight. Okay, so that's, as an example.
Now can I pause on that real quick? Can I pause on that? Because there's a little bit of criticism within BMI, because if you're like a big, bulky bodybuilder guy, like that might shift that BMI. So, but the reality is like that's a very small fraction of what we're talking about.
It is, and I agree with you totally. I mean, I've worked with athlete populations who their BMI is 32, but it's because they're, huge muscular. I mean, certainly body fat percentage would be an easier metric, or a better metric, I should say. The easier metric is BMI. It's basically your, height divided by weight, or weight divided by height. There's a formula. It's pretty simple as long as you've got those two easily obtained metrics. So, anyhow, that aside, and you're right, it's a relatively small fraction when you're talking about, people who are incredibly muscular driving that BMI over 30. 1985, half the states, nationwide prevalence of about 8% meeting the criteria for obesity. So it's fairly low by today's standards. And some states, it was more like 3 or 4%. Colorado, for example, generally maybe a little healthier and more active, etc. And so you fast forward through the years, and you start to see, this exponential increase. And it dovetails kind of, interestingly enough, personal computing, the internet, social media, smartphones, that kind of thing. And so I think, when you're looking for causes potentially, I mean, that aspect of maybe not being as active plays a huge role. Diet certainly plays a huge role as well. And so you see that exponential increase to where we are today, which is a staggering and kind of harrowing statistic. We're over 40% obese, the population.
Obese, not even overweight, just obese. Overweight, what's the overweight population?
Overweight, I believe it's in the 60%, I want to say 64, 65, and that's I believe over 27 is overweight, in between 27 and 30. So yeah, it's a massive problem, and so people ask me about genetics and what the role is of genetics. Like we're predisposed to be overweight, and really all we have to do is look back at these data and say, well, okay, this is environmental. Genetics doesn't change that fast in 40 years. This is an environmental effect. For whatever reason, something's happening here in the mid 80s, and it's we're changing rapidly up until the modern day. So.
Well, it's interesting. I was talking to some. I was in fact running yesterday morning, and I was talking to some buddies about it. Thanks. And I was, but actually this topic came up exactly, and we were discussing. It's in the morning. It's a bunch of guys. We're sort of just spitballing what we think might happen and why this is the case. But there's a lot of different factors. One is you can go down these nefarious rabbit holes, and then you can also go down the idea of have we allowed, what's part of the culture that we have that obviously, we've changed our diets. There's a lot, and to your point, we've changed our diets. We're eating more sugar. You probably have some data on that. We're living more sedentary. And then also, what's the factors of like it's okay. Like, yeah, it's just your genetics. Like, how many times do we hear that? How many times is that being told to the public? where it's not necessarily true. And what you're saying is that it isn't true, but we've believed it. So now we're more likely, instead of saying like, no, I can beat my genetics. It's going to be hard. Or it's not genetics at all, but it's environmental. It's going to be hard. I'm going to have to change behavior. But because we've accepted as a culture that there is a genetic component, or so many of us have, then it's like, well, no matter what behavior I have, it's not going to matter. So there's this underlying actually social detriment to what's going on that robs people of their authority over this. So that's a lot. What do you think about that?
You're absolutely right. This is a great line of reasoning to challenge, the genetic predisposition for things. And, up until really the last 40 or 50 years, genetics was considered, destiny. So for instance, macular degeneration, if it's in your family, it's just a matter of time before you go blind. I mean, that was the conventional wisdom, really. But now we know that you can do so much for that disease, and really all diseases, over the lifespan, and these are, behavioral modifications, in terms of eating behavior, activity, physical activity. Huge effects. You can reduce your risk by 70% with regard to macular degeneration by making lifestyle changes, and again, consistently over your lifespan.
So I want you, can you elaborate on that? Because obviously we're talking about metabolic disease, but that's a number that nobody really talks about. And so first, can you cite that data, and then 70%? I mean, that's good lifestyle changes over, lifestyle choices over time, not necessarily changes, but choices over time can impact your outcome. That's not a number that would align with like AREDS 2, for example. AREDS 2, the best you could do would be to supplement, right? And that would be an old supplement, and it would only give you about 25% risk reduction.
Yeah, and so and you look at the AREDS data, and I know we're getting mildly off topic here with metabolic.
No, it's okay. We'll come back.
But I think this is really important to talk about in this sort of global scheme of things. You look back at epidemiology, and this is Johanna Seddon's work from 1994, Julie Mars in 2011. Both find that a lifetime, of you take a snapshot of folks who are of advanced age, and you look at their life, that they lived in terms of diet, exercise, etc., behaviors, and then where are they when they're 75, 80 years old? Do they have macular degeneration, heart disease, etc.? What's their BMI? And you find, consistently that this was replicated. This Julie Mars replicated what Johanna Seddon found. Basically, a 45% reduction in risk for development of AMD. And then if you don't smoke, and you have, pretty good physical activity, 3 to 4 times a week, vigorous physical activity, that number becomes 71% reduced risk for AMD. And that's huge, right? If there were a drug that could do that,
yes.
It would just, you give everybody that drug. Unfortunately, it requires discipline. It requires, good, healthy behaviors throughout your lifespan. And AREDS looked at only people with macular degeneration. They did not look for a preventative effect. And so a lot of good came out of AREDS. I do have my, battles with it occasionally.
Oh, yeah.
Certainly, I'm on the side of prevention, and so we didn't look at really prevention other than prevention of progression to different stages.
Right.
But the idea of getting way out in front of it was kind of lost in that study, and so. But there is a lot you can do, and this is true of anything related to, say, metabolic syndrome. It's a long game, and so what we want to do for patients is to say, okay, you might not be in a great place right now, but there's a lot you can do that's positive. It does require discipline, and that's the key. As human beings, we always gravitate towards what's easy, and is it easy to go out and physically exercise like you do, Chris? Every morning going out for a run, in the cold temperatures there in Nebraska this time of year.
Don't remind me.
It's hard.
Rubbing it in.
It's hard, right? And so, I'm here in Phoenix, and it's 75 degrees. Anyway, but no, it's hard regardless of temperature, right? You have to get up, wake yourself up, get out of bed, and go and run. That's not easy. So the easy thing is to kind of like, well, wake up, sit on the couch, and same thing with diet. The easy thing is to eat easy foods and, have something pre-made, maybe fast food, whatever. It's much easier. I agree. And the stuff tastes great. I mean, it's very savory and sweet, whatever. And so it's a little harder to eat healthy and, whole foods and prepare your own food, cook, that kind of thing. So we're I don't want to say people are lazy. I say people are just, it's easier. And so, really it's hard to argue with that approach, but you have to be disciplined, I think, to be healthy.
So my comment there would be so some of the guys that I hang around with, they'll say you just got to pick your hard. Like if you get up and sit on the couch all day long and eat greasy food, and like that might seem easy now, but at some point it's going to be hard. For most of us, it'll be hard. And I think once you get into a habit, what they would tell you is like once you're in a habit, that becomes easy. It would actually be really hard for me to change my lifestyle, or for some of them, for sure, some of these guys that I'm around to change their lifestyle. Now, I feel like I'm sounding a little bit preachy, and that's not the point. The point is that there are hard things all the time, and this is one of them that's probably worth like taking the harder path, at least initially, because then the longer term path becomes easier, perhaps. And so I want to kind of come back to metabolic disease, because I think it was really apropos when you were talking about macular degeneration and some of those earlier studies, when you add in all of those things, none of that was supplementation that you mentioned, right? If you talk about prevention, none of those things. I mean, there might have been, good, healthy lifestyle choices. There might have been, we're going to pick whole foods that are colorful. But of that 70%, I didn't hear you mention anyway, and maybe there was a component of it, but ultimately it was largely related to or connected to things that would drive lower risk of metabolic disease. So having said that, that's pretty controllable. And yeah.
It really is. And we talked about macular degeneration, and, you think about other, age-related diseases. And when you think about disease, just in a general sense, you think, well, okay, you catch a disease or you get a disease. And with age-related disease, anything, neurodegenerative disease like macular degeneration, Alzheimer's disease, cardiovascular disease as well, which, the incidence rises precipitously with age. You think, well, okay, you get to a certain age and then you get it. That's not how it works. It's a gradual cumulative damage that's manifest as disease at some point in your life. Now, that's why we see age-related disease happening to people in their 50s. We see legitimate cases of macular degeneration, for instance, occurring in the late 40s, early 50s, like not juvenile, not early onset. It's legitimate macular degeneration, and it's these predisposing factors, excessive oxidative stress and inflammation. As it turns out, exercise plays a role, perhaps through epigenetics. Diet impacts epigenetics as well. It suppresses these genes, these factors that lead to aging of tissues and damage. And so, one of the major themes here that I want to impart to the audience is that it's a long game. And so you make small changes. And, you mentioned supplementation. That's, where my studies are, interventional studies with carotenoids, omega-3s. These specific nutrients have really strong effects, and they're the ones that were determined to be the driving causes in the epidemiology that I mentioned earlier that led to these massive, reductions in risk for developing, for instance, AMD. But this goes for other diseases of aging as well, and they also help in the interim. You don't have to wait until you're 70 or 80 years old to realize benefit. But yeah, it's a long game, and that's a major point.
Well, and so, okay, I want to talk about a few things first, because let's keep on the long game. All right, so in your research, when we think about if it's the long game, and you're talking about people in their 50s who might want to have an impact on their longer term period of life,
Sure.
How much are they going to have to start changing in their 50s? What about in their 40s? What about in their 30s? Like, let's say you were active in high school and you go 10 years and you active, your diet changes, you're not very good for 10 years. Like, how do we talk to patients about, listen, you're 35 years old and we can impact change, or we're 40 years old and now I think about how hard it would be for me to change my behaviors now at 43, as ingrained as they are, as part of my identity as they are, all my behaviors, good and bad.
Right.
It'd be really hard. So how do we handle that clinically? How do we handle that with our patients? Because the thing is like, so I'm sitting here thinking about, my patient that's got type 2 diabetes, mild retinopathy, 49 years old, obese, right? Doesn't look that heavy, but really by definition, obese. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, the conversation I'm having with you about, hey, and I'll ask them, hey, do you want to go work out in the morning? And they'll say, well, it's too cold, it's too dark, I need to get in shape. It's like, that's the point. But like, to really have that conversation, it's like, I don't want to be defeatist. I have the conversation, but like, that change for that guy is infinitely harder than, or actually I would say, if I'm that guy in my state and you say, hey, Chris, I want you to get up in the morning and hang out on the couch and eat a burger all day long and munch all day long, like, that behavior change for me would be infinitely hard, just like his behavior change would be infinitely hard. So what do we do with that?
That's a good perspective, and I'm with you. I'm pretty physically active. It's a habit now, and I agree. It would be hard to go back. It would be hard to go back to, after my high school days. I was eating a lot of fast food, and my body was used to processing it. Now, my daughter has a part-time job. She's in high school. She works at Taco Bell, and she'll occasionally bring home, some food for me, and I'll try it, and whatever. And it's like, whoa, I just don't feel right, and so it's that whole thing, but in reverse, right? And so,
right.
I've been there. I get it, and so I think that. It's a tough, this is the $1 million question, right? Patients, how do you motivate them to make a change other than just saying, oh, you need to exercise and you have a healthy diet.
Yeah.
See you later. See you next time. They feel fine. And so they think, well, I'm okay. I feel fine. I'm all right. No, nothing really wrong. I'm not diagnosed technically with any disease. And, so I must be all right. It's a scary thing. It almost, when you think about where you're headed. And so I'm not on board with scaring people into doing things, but if you look at the future and you think, well, you might be more susceptible to developing things like Alzheimer's disease, for instance, maybe in your 60s. Nobody wants to be there, and we've all been probably touched by Alzheimer's disease in some way, and you see the horrible, it's a pernicious disease, and what a burden, for family, friends, care providers. It brings other people, way down. It's really hard. And so nobody wants that. Nobody wants macular degeneration, certainly diabetes. That's maybe a strategy, is to, illustrate to people, like, here's, for somebody, if they don't do anything, in your instance, you may be putting yourself at risk for developing these diseases. Now, mind you, it might not be until 10, 15, 20 years down the road, but these are bad things to happen to a person.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and you don't want to sugarcoat it, and also you don't want to abandon them. It's like, oh, I'll be here to help you when that happens, and I hope it doesn't. But these are the things that we can change now, because I think if you think about it, like smoking cessation on the risk of AMD onset and progression, basically your risk becomes the same as it was had you never smoked after 20 years. So that means that if you're 50 years old and you want to make a change, by the time you're 70, if you've really made a change, you still can. There's a lot of life left after 70 if you've lived it well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And same thing to say at 30. Maybe you haven't done things well at 30, and okay. So I know we're talking about smoking, but I think you could probably apply the same sort of reasoning of, if you commit to something, whatever that lifestyle is, for a period of time, 5, 10, 20 years, you probably can undo a lot of what you've done up to a certain point.
Yeah, you absolutely can. And I've seen this with my own eyes, and I'm sure you have as well, in the chair as an optometrist. And, you see changes maybe in the retina, you see changes in, in my case, visual performance. And also personally, I mean, we've had folks, in my family that, my wife's grandmother who was diagnosed with AMD in her family, early 60s, and her mother, bilateral went blind, in her late 60s. And so this was, in her early 60s, started her supplementing with the macular carotenoids, lutein, zeaxanthin, mesozeaxanthin. And I was very early in my career. And I said, oh gosh, we have to do something about this. These can help. And so consistently, she has taken these over the past, 25 or 30 years. And she's 91 now. And she switched ophthalmologists because her, doctor retired. And her new ophthalmologist said, well, you were diagnosed with macular degeneration, dry form, back in 1980 something, and she said, yep, I've got macular degeneration. I take my, my eye pills, and it's all good. And he goes, well, if I was to examine you today, I would not diagnose you with AMD. You don't have retinal signs of AMD anymore, and that's 30 years. I mean, that's pretty amazing. And given the genetic, the family history and all that. So, I've seen all of this from all different angles. Athletes who are at the top of their game get better because of, performance advantages, enhancing, from the carotenoids, from omegas. And so there are things you can do that are relatively easy, actually. You talk about getting the right nutrients, the ones that have been studied really carefully, these macular carotenoids, the omegas. There are other nutrients that have effects on lipid metabolism, on glucose metabolism as well. Very well studied. The history goes back, and again, it takes a little bit of work if you're going to eat the food, for sure. A little easier if you've got, some really high quality supplements, and you can realize these effects. And they do, like you say, have these dramatic effects, just like cigarette smoking cessation. You're talking about all of these direct effects, antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, but also you're switching on these factors that lead to cleaning up of the system, cleaning up debris in the retina, in the brain, improving blood flow out to capillary beds, all of this stuff. Epigenetic effects, turning on these circuits that are healthy and signal basic youthful function. So we all want to act more youthful. That's certainly a good way to do it. So you can have a huge impact with just nutrition. But of course, we're talking a little bit about exercise as well here. But
well, I want to get into the nutrition in a second. I actually want to get into some of the specifics because you mentioned some things about changing some of the way that your metabolism is for your lipid metabolism and some of those other things. I want to get into more specifics there about the specific nutrients because that's interesting to me. But before I do that, there's one other kind of thought process I wanted to go down because, in a lot of these patients that I see, a lot of ocular surface disease patients, and I wanted to go down the course of, how much does the ocular or the oxidative stress of metabolic disease impact inflammation systemically, but also inflammation inside or on the anterior surface of the eye. So low-grade inflammation inside of the eye, but also like ocular surface dysfunction, where we see inflammation as a primary driver. My suspicion is largely that if patients cleaned up their diets and cleaned up I think a lot of it is also just other factors, the type of things that we do. We're not blinking, but like how much of that could be controlled by like better diets, better, exercise habits. So can you talk a little bit about, inflammatory process within metabolic diseases?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can confirm your suspicions that, if you were to clean up, have a less inflammatory, oxidative, sort of situation diet-wise, the eyes are, these markers for, all sorts of health, as as an eye doctor, and systemic inflammation can be seen on ocular surface. That inflammation is influenced by that. Certainly, you can have a window to the brain by looking at the retina. Cardiovascular health is also, you get a window into that, from the eyes. Diabetes is an extremely pro-inflammatory condition, And hyperglycemia, if it's uncontrolled sugar levels, that's also highly oxidative. And so you end up producing these hydroxyl radicals, and then that triggers an immune response, these macrophages and neutrophils, which use reactive oxygen species as their inflammatory response. It's a cycle. So oxidation begets inflammation, and that begets more oxidation, and then you cycle. And it's not just speculation now. We have tons of hard data that show that, for instance, we're talking about carotenoids, lutein, zeaxanthin, mesozeaxanthin in the eye. Controlling all things, diet, BMI, everything. If you have a diabetic versus a non-diabetic patient, the macular pigment is nearly 3 times as high in the non-diabetic as it is the diabetic patient. So what that is indicating is that these carotenoids, even if you're eating them, are getting used up systemically. In an attempt, the body's trying to use these really powerful nutrients systemically. They don't just go directly to the eye, they're in the body. And then if whatever's left over gets to target tissues like the eye and the brain, skin, cardiovascular system. And so they're being used up
They're being used up primarily as an antioxidant.
That's right, systemically, right.
Yeah.
And so you're depleting that store, and then which means less gets to tissues like the retina, and we know because of the pro-inflammatory state systemically, that's going to impact all tissues of the body, whether directly or indirectly. In the case of the cornea as well, the ocular surface, you've got a relationship between certain pro-inflammatory cytokines systemically and those that are found on the ocular surface. IL-17RA, I know, is certainly one of those. But there's a vast literature that indicates this, pro-inflammatory state systemically, how that impacts the eye, not only sort of anterior, but posterior as well, segment and retina clear through to the front and in the cornea. So,
well, it's hard because
right.
because a lot of the things you're talking about are these even low grade inflammatory processes where they're what might be called subclinical. Like you might have a patient that has a patient with bilateral anterior uveitis, and I had a patient like this over the last 3 months that we've been managing, and so you get kind of these standard lab tests. There's this kind of battery of lab tests that you're suspicious. When you have that occur, you're pretty suspicious that there's something systemic going on. But in your gut, I'm sitting back and I always think like, well, 50% of the time there's a cause that we can identify. The other 50% of the time we will not be able to identify it. So the first lab test that the patient got through our kind of general lab was like positive for everything, positive for Sjogren's, positive for rheumatoid factor, positive for ANA. And so then, that allows us to get her in with a rheumatologist, right? The rheumatologist comes and they do the same labs, they repeat them, and everything comes back normal, right? Comes back negative. Now this patient she doesn't look, she's 70 years old. She doesn't look like she's super overweight, probably because that's what we've become used to, but she's definitely obese. And so then the diagnosis becomes, well, the original lab work that was done through the hospital system was all false positives. Our new lab work that we use is all the accurate one. That's what the rheumatologist tells her. And I'm left thinking, like, how do we get a hospital-based lab that gets everything false positive because it was repeated and it was negative? Or could it have just been that whatever the amount of inflammation, because at that time, we had it controlled. We had it controlled with topical medications. Maybe the only place that we were seeing it was anterior chamber reaction. But the thing I think about is like, well, how many of these things and that was a significant one. Like, but it just was significant enough at that time to create an anterior chamber reaction in both eyes, come back positive on all these tests, but we controlled it, or it just ran its course and the inflammation sort of cycled down. And when it was checked again, it was all fine. Like these are the sort of clinical questions that I have a lot where it's like, and now it was just like, oh, it's idiopathic. We don't know what's causing it. Well, really the thing that it leaves me thinking is like, could we just have her, she's 70, but could she walk every day? Could she change her diet? Could she can we make it a bigger impact because her blood sugar is spiking? And anyway, what's your reaction to that? I mean, that's sort of, does that seem reasonable?
CooperVision and the AOA have joined forces in a groundbreaking initiative to transform how optometrists treat children with myopia. The Myopia Collective aims to unite our profession and its allies to challenge the status quo and elevate the standard of care for children with myopia. Everyone is invited to become a member of the collective. By joining, you pledge to act in slowing childhood myopia progression. Membership includes regular updates and information about the collective's efforts, access to educational opportunities and resources, and insights from the ambassador optometrists who advocate for community policy and changes supporting the collective's mission. Click the link in the show notes to join the collective today. We've been partnering with EssilorLuxottica 360 for a while now, and it helps us in 3 areas. First, they use social media campaigns to highlight products that we believe in and prescribe to our patients, and they deliver those patients back to our practice. Second, EssilorLuxottica 360 enhances our patient experience through staff training tools that help us simplify and streamline the way we communicate about our products and services. Lastly, but for my practice most importantly, it helps us make good business decisions related to our optical offerings. We will systematically and objectively analyze what our patients are purchasing and what they like, and removing products that our patients are not really using or not really drawn to. This, along with additional rebates and immediate savings, helps us continue to deliver high-quality products and services to our patients and keeps our practice resilient. Check out EssilorLuxottica 360 for yourself by visiting EssilorLuxottica360.com.
Yeah, it does, and I mean that's an interesting case, and I mean you're not alone. I mean this kind of thing happens occasionally, and there's a basis for that if there's some kind of a flare up, for instance, that'll occur occasionally, and some folks you'll have a flare up and you'll get maybe some you'll see it on the skin, eczema, psoriasis, or something that's related to systemic inflammation. Certainly the eye, and maybe that was what was going on there. Another related sort of phenomenon I think that's important just from a big picture perspective in medicine is, what do we base, where are the norms now? So you do tests and you see okay, so the norm, and by the way, these norms have shifted significantly over the past 50 years. What's normal for, cholesterol is a good example, but what's normal for, blood lipids, what's normal for,
I love to talk about cholesterol.
Parameters.
We should talk about that sometime.
Yeah, no kidding. So, that's been a little bit of a moving target, but my point is that, these things are shifting to the direction of, to where it's acceptable. What's the average person? And is that average person healthy anymore? I wonder about that. Certainly we have, vitamin levels that we know are kind of vitamin and essential minerals and stuff like that are, we know kind of where they're supposed to be. But I wonder, if you're moving that needle out to unhealthy, and if we're saying, okay, you're okay, when in fact it's we really need to work it back down to the healthy range, what used to be maybe considered normal. And so I worry about that word sometimes, that normal. What does that mean?
So this process, so the changes that we see since 1984 within the CDC data, and the numbers that you arrive at, there's no other conclusion. There's no other reasonable conclusion outside of diet and sedentary lifestyle. Is that accurate?
I think that's accurate. You can drill down a little farther and look at things like processed foods, the ultra processing of foods and those kinds of things, but we're still on food. What you're eating, and it's the activity levels. And when you look at activity, it's little things. In the 1980s, you would have to get off the couch to turn the channel on the TV, for instance. I mean, little things like that. It sounds ridiculous and silly, but I think it's easy now to say, well, everybody walks around with their phone, and it's you sit with your phone, and you're looking at things instead of maybe going out and doing something, going for a walk. But it's not like you have to go to the gym for 3 hours a day. I think it's little additive, bits of exercise, just getting up and going and standing as opposed to sitting, for instance. Doing a little bit of exercise every day adds up a lot. The food aspect of it is huge as well. Again, what's easy? Things that taste really good now. Salt, sweet, and fat. Wow, that used to be rare back in the day. Hundreds of years ago, we didn't have too much of that, and so we developed these cravings. We need some of that, certainly, to function. Some, but not as much as we're getting generally today. So, yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the reasonable conclusion is that this is an environmental thing. This is all, what we put in our bodies and what we're doing with our bodies.
You're a cautious guy, Jim, but I'm generally cautious too, but I'm gonna sort of open a little bit of a can of worms, So we talked a little bit about behavior and feeling like, again, if we've medicalized this and geneticized it where it doesn't need to be medicalized and geneticized, then, if those are even words, then what about things like the GLP-1 agonists that are available now that have gotten many of my patients, whether they have diabetes or don't have diabetes, are taking these on a regular basis. And if you talk to them, most of them sort of say, yeah, I don't think I want to be on this forever, but boy, it's really giving me some good results. So there's this sort of underlying thought that yeah, it's probably not good for me to be on a medication constantly to suppress my appetite. And maybe I'll be able to change, but you've already said it's processing food, it's the food we take in. I can't help but think, this bigger scale of okay, well, our food companies and our pharmaceutical companies, I think it's a little too far. Maybe I'm not ready to go there yet that it's nefarious, but they're finding solutions to problems. Those relatively simple solutions for people, and why are people so? And I don't think that's necessarily nefarious, in so much as it's just hey, we can find a fix and we can make a lot of money on this fix, and so we'd rather just give you the fix. Yeah, how do you unpack that? The
semaglutide, Ozempic, etc. And I don't mean to, of course, slander anything or anybody. This is, wow, it's a huge issue from a lot of different angles. And, our metric for health in this case is what? It's weight, right? It's how much you weigh. And so it's not, are you healthy? There is a healthy weight, right? And I get it, generally speaking, if you're 100 pounds overweight, you need some help. Get down. Certainly, I'm not going to begrudge you for that. That's good. To lose the weight. How it works? It's an appetite suppressant, effectively, right? And so you eat less, and that generally you might think, well, that's a good thing. Well, what are you eating? And typically they're still the same foods that they would eat, just less. So you're talking about French fries, chicken nuggets, and I don't mean to generalize too much, but it's probably not the healthiest food. And so you're starting to see cases that I've seen reported now. It's been out long enough to where you've got nutrient deficiency in these folks. And they're, precariously deficient in really good nutrients because they're not eating a lot of food. And then what they are eating isn't really nutrient dense. So it's pretty empty calories. And then another point on this is, I mentioned easy. What's easy, and this is easy, right? Wow, you don't have to be Chris Wolfe, running 5 miles, 10 miles a day, whatever you do, to stay in shape. You can take a pill, get an injection, and that's, that's appealing, right? You don't have to necessarily exercise to lose weight. You don't have to, cognitively limit your intake. And so, and all of this is pretty unnatural. I am well known for saying, nature always wins. You can't trick nature. And so now we're starting to see some reports come out of, the effectiveness length, the period of effectiveness of these drugs is, maybe 6 or 7 months. And so then you start to see it wear off. The body is, the magical part of the human body, or really any biological entity, is its ability to adapt. So it adapts, it changes. And this allows us to adapt to all sorts of different conditions. Environmental, internal, food, what we put in the body, what we don't put in the body. You're able to adapt and overcome, certain circumstances. That's a magical part of the human body. So it's not a 1 + 1 = 2. It's, it's a 1 + 1 = something, and it depends on how the body reacts to it. And so it looks like, at least preliminarily, like this drug will not last forever in terms of its effect. Where do we go from here? Folks, I worry about them yo-yoing, going, off and going back and then up and down, and that's not healthy. That's not good for the body at all, in terms, again, of this massive inflammatory cascade. And then, you settle back down and then do that over and over. It's not healthy. So, I worry about malnutrition with this drug. I know folks are very excited about using it and losing the weight. And heck, I would be too, for sure, because that's what's been held over people's heads for so long is, you need to meet your target weight. You need to lose weight. And if that's the goal, then this does it. But, healthy, what is healthy? And that's really should be our concern. That should be, top of the page.
Well, that's what where we started was weight, right? BMI and so that's where we started the conversation, and it's a metric, and that can kind of get that number down. But like all the other intrinsic things that come from, so I'll tell you, like I think I've said it before. If I have a struggle, I love ice cream. I love ice cream, and I love ice cream at nighttime, like the worst time to have ice cream. Yeah. And my wife is smart enough for me. I got home the other day. Actually, it must have been a Monday. It must have been Monday night, and I got home, we ate dinner, and I've been fasting 5 days a week, where I'd fast for basically like a 22-hour period. So I have like a 2 hour to 2.5 hour eating window, and I've done this since July, and only it's awesome because, one, like I feel my GI system feels way better, but also it allows me to have periods where I don't have to, like if we're going to have pasta and grains and, sit down with a big meal on the weekends, like I can still have fun with food. I don't feel like I'm challenged by it. Now that's worked for me. It doesn't work for everybody, but it's been, I can say, listen, I'm going to fast and I can have a great meal at dinner. But the thing I love and the thing I really want is a pint of ice cream, at 8:30 at night. And I know it's not good, but Jamie, I think I got home and I was like, why don't you ever, she had, the groceries came and I said, why don't you ever get ice cream? Like, why don't you ever have ice cream? I always got to go buy my own ice cream. And she was kind of like, she sort of played it off a little bit, but I think I know she's smart enough to know that they're like, I just keep it out. And so now I got to make a trip to the store. And so it's like another behavior, right? It's another behavior. If I can just withhold it. And I haven't had any ice cream this week because it has been inconvenient for me to go to the store.
She's making it hard for you. Yeah, exactly. Yes. So it's not easy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so like, I say all that to say, like, well, we've sort of adapted these things in place, and we're not perfect by any means. Like I said, but it makes me think, like, well, could the semaglutides, could the GLP-1 agonists, could they actually serve as a way to get people on track? Like, could we actually put it in place and implement it where like the way we use it, the way we prescribe it is, I'm going to prescribe this for you, but I'm also going to get you in contact with a personal trainer or with we've got to get, because it's only going to last 6 months or 7 months. I'm really cynical that we're going to actually have active movement toward that. But that's where I think there's a ton of opportunity. There's a ton of opportunity with it to sort of ignite this lifestyle change. Right. But that means that there's going to be hard after, right? We can ignite this, but there's going to be hard after. That's what I worry about with this medication. For
Yeah,
sure.
but I agree. I think that if you are able to, as part of the prescription, certainly recommend and get folks on, some form of exercise program, some form of, like, hey, let's evaluate your diet. And, if you can, condition, if you can connect the exercise aspect, obviously you're taking the semaglutide drug, but, the exercise aspect with the weight loss, and you're kind of grooved on it, and like have noted once or twice in this podcast, it's a habit. It becomes a habit. Your exercise, you recognize that, okay, I'm feeling better. When I exercise, I feel great. When I eat better, I feel better. And so you hope, that's an optimistic viewpoint, but you hope that takes hold. And it's not sort of like, well, I'm doing my Ozempic and it's I've lost all this weight, and people are losing a lot of weight, and that's great. But then, it becomes ineffective, or you are taken off of the drug, and then what do you do? Well, you revert back to your old habits, and so you've got to form some new habits, I think, and that, if you can groove those, again, part of this is psychology, a big part of it, and if
totally.
you can, connect the two, like I'm exercising. Yeah, the drug is happening, but I'm going to maintain this because this feels good being lighter. It feels good when I exercise. It feels good when I put healthy stuff and food in my body. If you can hit that, that's like the trifecta, and you're in good shape going forward. But again, I'm skeptical. People tend to gravitate back to the couch, and so.
Yeah.
That the easy way out. They don't want to have to drive to the store to get their pint of ice cream. It's
yeah. Let alone have to
yeah.
walk to the store. What if I had to walk to the store, right? Like you
There
made
you
a
go.
point
Yeah,
of like
she
our
hides her
phones,
keys,
but
your car keys.
yeah. Now I could even just, which I'm sort of, I haven't even thought about this. Maybe I should, but like I could DoorDash it. Like I know,
my God,
but
yes.
yeah, like
another easy thing, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yikes! Oh, Chris, shame on you.
and you, and I planted that seed. Now I'm going to think about it.
Yeah.
But the thing that all of this, you brought up health, and then you also brought up, mistaking weight for health. And one of the things that all of this stuff does is when it's all connected and it's working well. For me, it's my prayer life, it's my family life, it's my physical life, it's my professional life. When those are firing on all cylinders, it's not just that, my physique looks okay, or that my GI system feels good. It's like my life feels like it's aligned, right? Like it feels like things are just in tune and in sync. Yeah. And if any of those things get out of whack, then things sort of tilt and jumble. And that's, I think, the ultimate thing of, and that happens to me, right? It totally happens to me where if my prayer life is not good, then I'll sort of be focused on other things, and internally my, like I'll think about something that might be a little bit, I'm not settled on, or I haven't identified how I'm going to fix that problem, or how I'm going to, and like, I'll just get this little like sort of anxiety in my stomach. Right. But if my wife and I are just a little out of sync, or my kids and I are just a little out of sync, then I'm much more anxious, right? I'm much more, like when I think about, it's not even related, but like think about the practice, or like, how am I going to handle this? Or the new building's coming out, I've got this big office expense that we're going to have. Like, you just get a little pit in your stomach, right? It makes you more anxious, as opposed to like when those things are aligned and that's what I've learned. That's why I'm so disciplined. It's like, I can be disciplined because I know like almost everything that I'll think about stuff. I'm like, oh, this would make me really anxious if all of those things, if I wasn't staying focused on all of those things, that thought would make me anxious. But when it's all aligned, it's like, no, I can have that thought. I can consider it. I can internalize it. I can process it. I can actively think about it. But everything's kind of in sync. And so I don't know whatever that means, but I think that's what you're looking for in health, right? You're looking for that sort of reaction to health.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. It really does. I mean, I can certainly relate to that, having this, sort of homeostasis in your life.
I love that word.
Holistically, everything's in balance. And when you're firing on all cylinders, how great that feels. I mean, it's like everything is lined up and great, and and you want that for everybody. You want to grab your patient and say, "Come inside my body here and feel this," and this is where we want to be. And you're in a health, maybe a little bit of a disarray, and so we need to, kind of restore balance, and physiologically we can do that. Nutrition plays a huge role. You can kind of push the reset button, just introducing certain compounds, even these carotenoids, for instance, lutein.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Let's round out this discussion with that.
Yeah, I mean, those compounds, they're like a positive shock to the system. So I've done, numerous intervention studies, and when I was at the University of Georgia, we did a study, and my wife's part of the research team, the brains of the operation, and I know I just do the heavy lifting.
She's probably the looks too, Jim.
Yeah, if we're being honest, absolutely, yeah. And then my kids thankfully got her looks. Anyway, but yeah, so she did a lot of the blood work and assessed pro-inflammatory cytokines. Antioxidant potential was the most interesting finding to me. I mean, granted, we found significantly lowered inflammation versus placebo, and this is just with the carotenoids, lutein, zeaxanthin, mesozeaxanthin, and just over a 6-month period in healthy young adults. These are college-age students from 18 to 25 years old. And one of the really the strongest finding we found in the blood, there were other benefits, certainly visual performance, cognitive performance, but in the blood was this antioxidant potential. It was dramatic. The bar was huge compared to placebo. And the higher that potential, that means the higher systemically your body's able to quench free radicals. And this is all kinds of radicals, lipid-based peroxidation radicals, nitrogen, hydroxyl radicals, all of these. And so that's a very good thing, as you might imagine. So, and these students were having observations. Most of them were like, well, my vision at night is a lot better, and my memory is just sharper, and I don't have brain fog, and these kinds of things. But I can't help but think, well, that's related to this systemic reset button push. Bonk, there you go. All of this stuff is mopped up, all of that oxidation that would otherwise lead to inflammation, that would, lead to, the body kind of panicking a little bit because you're damaging, blood vessels. You're potentially raising up in areas that use a lot of oxygen for metabolism, like the retina or the brain. There's less protection there. You can't quench those radical oxygen species, and, we need a little bit of the free radical, the singlet oxygen. The body uses it, but it gets, again, out of homeostatic balance, and you're down the road to, oxidative stress. And that's not a good thing. This leads to that anxiety, stress. Yeah. We've studied that as well. And how.
So that actually plays a role. So that would actually create more anxiety as well. Like there's actually I guess I didn't even think about that oxidative stress and inflammatory process being linked to kind of another anxious process.
Isn't it interesting? True? Yeah, the psychological, so you raise up these levels, and any insult to the body is, in terms of stress, is viewed the same way. So you might be worried about relationship or money, or you might get hit on the leg with a stick. Any kind of stress, the body, what does it do? It dumps cortisol into the system. This is adrenal glands, and boom, there you go. And it's off to the races. There's an upregulate. There's immune system response. There's psychological effects. The body's all connected. And so if there's excessive oxidative stress in the body, then that's going to rise to the level of cognition, of psychology, of anxiety and stress. And then you lose sleep. That's a stressor. Sleep deprivation. You can't sleep because you're not sleeping, and all of these things. And we see so much of that in society. Again, all of it's connected. All of these things. You watch the evening news and you see commercials for all the pharmaceutical drugs that are treating issues that are all related to inflammation and oxidation and all of this. The outcomes that crop out from all of the precursor, the oxidative stress and inflammation, including lack of sleep. So it's
do you have do you have it's pretty rare, I would think, and I can't do this, but like, how many people do you think, or do you think people can actually, when they start feeling that additional anxiety or stress, wherever it's coming from them, like, how many people do you actually think can say, like, can step back and be like, all right, well, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to calm myself down and know, like, tomorrow's going to be better. And second, I'm going to really figure out, well, what got out of balance? Did I have too many beers this weekend, or too much wine, or did I eat too many pints of ice cream? Like it would seem to me that, or did I, it would seem to me that if you could be that in tune with sort of the way that your body is telling you, and your, spiritual life as well is like telling you what's going on, man, like, how empowered could you be?
Yeah, I think when you look at, it sounds like you, Chris, you've got a handle on a lot of things, and you're, have a level of awareness of.
I'm fooling a lot of people.
Well, yeah, maybe so, but
someday they're going to figure it out.
the discipline aspect of all of this is huge, and so if you're a very disciplined person and you're really paying attention to your body, I mean, like I've worked with many super high level athletes, and they're an interesting group because they know when even a little twinge of something's not quite right in their body. Something's not quite right with mentally or physically with their physical body, and so they're very in tune with that, and that's because they're in fantastic shape. They know exactly what's going into their body, what's going out, how much energy, what they can do in the gym, times if they're running, whatever. They know exactly what's going on. They know all the metrics. And so if something's off slightly, they can say, what's up? And, it can evaluate, okay, what did I do this weekend? Like you say, ice cream, beers, whatever. And so I think that, for folks that might be really, kind of in terms of a state of health, not in good shape, they're pretty far gone. And that ability to be refined in their thinking about health, about diet, what's going on with their body, that's lost in a lot of noise, I think. And so you want folks to get to a position where they've got a handle on that, and certainly people know what it feels like to feel good. They know what it feels like to possibly, even when they were children, to be in pretty good physical shape, to be able to do things. I used to be able to do 10 pull-ups or whatever, and maybe not so much anymore, but they know it. And so you want them to get back to that point where, and again, it comes with being in a state of generally good health. Easier said than done, but I think that, that's where we want our patients to be. And yeah, what a magical thing to be able to say, wow, yeah, I didn't really eat many, colored fruits and vegetables or leafy greens last couple weeks. Maybe that's part of it. And then, you realize that you get on that, and it's not a immediate, you can't eat a salad and then be like, woo, Superman, but you can, go a couple of weeks eating healthfully and you notice effects. I mean, it's, even me, I'm Captain Vegetable or whatever, and I tend to eat well, but, I fall off the wagon a little bit, but I come back on, and it's like, that's what it was, and clarity of thought even, and just, the ability to, I go on a run, and it's like some days are just like, whammo, I'm like, on top of the world, I can run all day. Other days it's like, oh man, my legs are not, they feel like they're twice as heavy as they used to be. And, I'm sure you experience that too. And it's like,
I do,
what's going on there? Well, you can usually derive back, to, what's going on, with a lot of its diet, and certainly, your sleep. I mean, it's all connected, but yeah, health is where we should be focusing, and certainly not weight, with respect to this conversation on metabolic health.
So, Dr. Jim Stringham, you've gone on a journey with me that probably took us in places that you didn't necessarily know we were going to go. And I really appreciate it because it lets my brain sort of wander in fun ways and ways that a lot of people aren't willing to kind of go down, pathways that people aren't willing to go down. So I appreciate that. I also want to recognize that, this whole entire hour that we've spent, you haven't talked once, I don't think, about MacuHealth, but you work work at MacuHealth, and one of the reasons that I think this is exciting for me is, can I do something better for my patients who have metabolic disease to maybe jumpstart and have conversations with them that aren't just going to fall on deaf ears, but give them a place to start that could be as simple as some of these other things that we could compound a larger discussion on. So tell me a little bit about what you guys are working on at MacuHealth. I know you were going to go the whole episode and not talk about it, but I think it's worth, if you're willing to talk about it. I'll give you a platform to talk about it right here at the end.
Well, I appreciate it. Yes, I am the Chief Scientific Officer for MacuHealth. I spent, the vast majority of my career in academia as a research scientist and a research professor. And so recognizing the, massive issue, this is a staggering problem that we've got here in the United States, and it's really the developed world, but, specific to the United States, we talked about the data. 50% of folks with either diabetes or pre-diabetes, metabolic syndrome is a huge deal. 60% of individuals, roughly by the time you're 60 years old, have some form of disease or metabolic syndrome. And so recognizing this issue and talking to docs over the past, 10 or 15 years about this, I thought, well, let's develop, a formula based on science to help individuals deal with, give doctors some ammunition for their patients. Again, the nutrients backed by, years of replicated science. This includes carotenoids, omega-3s, and nutrients that, aid in glucose metabolism and lipid metabolism. And so this product, we just released it fairly recently. It's called MacuHealth DM for daily metabolic. We see DM in the medical field and we think diabetes mellitus,
yep.
Of course. Technically, we're not treating a disease here. We're addressing issues that are associated with these kinds of, the syndrome, namely oxidative stress, inflammation, and, glucose metabolism. And so, MacuHealth DM, I'm really excited about this, the potential to help individuals. Again, we want to promote, this holistic approach to health. That includes, an exercise regimen, thinking about things the right way, moderate portions, changing diet as well. But, these are nutrients that we don't get enough of, certainly here in the United States in general. And so if you put these in your body, these kinds of positive shocks to the system, like I mentioned earlier, can happen. And you're helping patients. I mean, again, diabetic retinopathy helped. There were lots and lots of studies, and maybe I can send you a few that we can make available to the listeners.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
great.
The wealth of data. It's overwhelming. It's really great. And so we know about this, and we can help folks. And so that's very exciting to me.
So let's do that. If you can send that in a. I can create a document that will be clickable, that people can we'll create a web page just for that citation. So we'll post that in the show notes, and we'll link to it on all of our other social medias. And I think what's really telling, Jim, that I think is actually commendable is that we talked a whole lot about things that you had no vested interest as a company in, and that shows to me that like you view the bigger picture as part of a holistic approach, and I think that speaks a lot to what you guys are doing, and so thanks for doing it, and thanks for playing a role and offering something for our patients, but also thinking about it as a piece of the whole pie, and I think that's what's challenging for a lot of us is like how, from an eye care perspective, how can we help the whole patient more without losing sight of the eyes? And so you've done a great job of articulating some of these bigger points that and where you can push the button. So thanks for doing it. I appreciate the conversation.
Great. Yeah, you bet. Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Hey, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and our YouTube channel, both linked in the show notes. Now, here's something exciting. We're giving away a 1-year subscription to Comprehensive Optometry Simplified. All you have to do is leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, take a screenshot, and email it to me at questions@icodeeducation.com. We'll put that in the show notes as well. We'll be selecting a winner on December 15th, so don't miss your chance to get access to this valuable resource. Thanks again for listening. I can't wait to see your reviews.